is sort of the gold standard, what everyone wants, and that is a general operating support grant. That means they give you the money and you can use it for whatever you want, obviously within reason. You can't buy a bunch of, I had a, you know what, never mind. You can't just buy whatever you want. But whatever you want to do with your organization, you can do with general operating support. That includes admin, travel, conferences, those expenses that funders might not necessarily want to give money towards. General operating support, you can do whatever you want with it. It's very flexible. The next type of grant is a programmatic grant. And so these are grants for a specific program that your organization runs. The funder will want to hear more about that program in particular rather than all of your programs as a whole. And they might just want to see a budget for that program and not your organization's whole budget. Some, just to differentiate a little, some funders are willing to pay for all programmatic expenses, but they don't want to pay for any admin expenses. So they might say you can use the funds for whatever you want, except for staffing and admin. Does that make the most sense? Do we all know? No, it doesn't. Staffing is so important. Admin and overhead are so necessary. But that's just how some people feel. They want to know that the money that they're spending is going directly to a client or a service. And so those are more restricted than general operating support gifts. Then there are sponsorships. We talked about that earlier. That is funds for specific events, fundraisers. To go back to a great example, the Predators, they sponsor actual programs, but they do sort of want their name involved. So they might say, we're sponsoring your library, but make sure that you put our logo up on the library. Maybe you have naming rights. Maybe they want their logo on your material. So that's what a sponsorship is. And then the final type of grant is a capital campaign. That is funds for new buildings and facilities. These are the rarest type of grants. They're often hyper specific by a funder. I don't foresee, it's obviously something that will come up as a need for village members, but I think when you're just starting out, it's not something that you would really be thinking about. But I put it on the list to cover everything. Okay, so any questions about the types of grants, the types of funders before we start going through kind of the checklist I made to see if you are grant ready? You can raise your hand or drop it into the chat.
This is Cara again. Based on the type of grants that we just walked through, between GenOps and the capital campaigns, would there ever be a space in which you strategically kind of look at, like, this is the year that I want to focus on GenOps, this is the year that I want to focus on sponsorships? Like setting that as a goal of like diversifying across those types, is that ever a good idea, is the question.
That's a good question. I would say no, but it would be a good idea. You kind of want to be applying for grants based more on like your alignment with the funder, rather than the type of grant that they're giving. Obviously, again, if you're prioritizing, you do want to prioritize general funds over program funds. The only thing I will say is that it might be good to say this year we are really prioritizing in expanding our corporate giving program, which includes grant writing. But if you were to undertake that, it wouldn't just be corporate grants. You also would be, tapping your board to see what kind of relationships they have with local companies, and it kind of would be its own campaign separate from the grant writing thing. There are countless companies in Nashville that give out funds but don't do it through a grant seeking or sponsorship process, and it's just a matter of who you know. So that's kind of its own process that you would undertake separate from this. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Thank you.
That's a really good question. um Anyone else have any questions? Okay, if you think of something, feel free to drop it into the chat. So number one thing that is going to keep you from getting a grant, and I think everyone here has this, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Are you a 501c3 organization? If you are not, then a funder cannot get a tax write-off and they don't want to give it to you. And you also are more of a business than a nonprofit. And then I've just run into this for the first time in my career, but I have a client who is also a 501c3 and a 501c4, which is for lobbying and advocacy. It can get involved in local elections, and most foundations will not give to a 501c3/4 because it's inherently political. I don't know all the tax reasons behind it. I'm sure there are tax reasons. And so that client actually has retained their 501c3 status and added a new status so that they can apply under the umbrella of that 501c3. You should expect funders are going to ask for one or all of the following documents. So you just want to make sure you have them on hand, because me and my clients, I'm sure some people on this call can attest to the fact that we have gone on crazy last minute operations to get some of these more obscure documents that are required by funders. So that could be your IRS determination letter or your proof of tax status, your Form 990, proof that you filed your taxes. That includes your Form 990 EZ. I know most of my clients just file that, but you're just going to want to be able to show that you did file. Your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, and your certificate of good standing with the state or the treasurer. You're going to want to have all of that on hand. And yes, I think that's a great point from Benias about making sure that you're taking funding from organizations that you agree with, and that you're not making a deal with the devil, so to speak. As I learned when I took a grant from Walmart and then found out that they wanted me to record the sexual orientations of all the parents of the students who were getting free lunch through my free lunch program. So it's not good for your organization, and it can introduce a whole bunch of headaches. You don't want to do free PR for people who are negatively affecting your community, and you want to be able to feel very free to do your work. So I think that's a really good point. So make sure that you have all these documents on hand. It's just best practice to make sure you have them on a folder and saved. And then when you're applying and it's the day of the application and you realize that your bylaws are on paper in someone's car, you're not running to get them. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, does your organization have a track record of success in the community that you can speak to? So here's the number one thing I tell people who come to me. This is the number one reason I turn people away, and it's not personal because I think everyone is doing amazing work. But most funders, not all, but most funders only want to give grants to organizations that have been a 501c3 for 3 years or longer. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule, but they want to be able to see that you've been able to handle that tax status, that you've been able to handle your budget, that you've been operating good programs for at least 3 years before they entrust you with their money. It does create a bit of a chicken or the egg situation. How am I going to run my program until I have that grant money? And then, they want to see that I can do a program before they give me the money. So when starting out, you're going to have to rely on other types of funding, like holding fundraisers, individual gifts, um, etc. It's not necessarily fair, but it's just kind of how the industry works. The second thing is it's important to make sure that you have data and measurement that can back up your work in the community. It doesn't have to be super complicated. It can just be, I know we served 350 people throughout the year. I know that our after school program served 100 kids. I gave out surveys and they said that, 80% of the people that came to my program learned more about health or something like that. You just want to be able to have some proof that your program works, because they're just reading off a piece of paper. They're seeing how amazing and dynamic it is in action. They may never have heard from you before. And so that's the only way they're going to be able to see your organization's impact, is through those numbers. So you want to make sure you have those storytelling numbers, I call them. And finally, you want to make sure that you're clear in what your mission is and what you do, both for yourself and to funders and the outside community. So funders want to see that you have streamlined programming, that you're doing one thing or three things really well versus 15 different sub programs that are pulling you in a number of ways. And you might just say, but Emalie, I am doing 15 different sub programs. That's fine. You don't have to stop doing what you're doing, but you do have to think about how you package that to a funder, for lack of a better word, so they see that you have major organizational initiatives that you're taking on versus throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. So, for example, I'm going to give a client that's not in Nashville. They're an organization that's doing block cleanups, pizza parties, they're doing events for local candidates, they're doing youth enrichment. They just hit the ground totally running. And every time I talk to them, they have a new program. Oh, now we're doing a singing competition. That's great. But when you talk about that to funders, you don't want to say, like, we have, our youth program and we do all these great activities. We have our civic engagement program and we're doing all these great activities. But you just really want to show there's a method to your madness and there's organization to what you're doing. And also, it's a lot of information to retain and take in. You want to think about when a funder is talking about your organization and looking at that application, if they say, I'm going to use the village as an example, hey, what does the village do? Someone else at that table could say, oh, I read the application. They provide consulting hours for Black-led organizations. You just want that elevator pitch about your organization that's so succinct. And that's going to benefit your organization in a ton of ways, not just in grant writing. If you have any questions, just let me know or shout them out, or I'll continue.
Would this qualify as a space in which an impact logic or like a logic model would be beneficial?
If you guys have a logic model, that's incredible. And if you have a
Okay.
logic model, you're 350 miles ahead of other people that are applying. Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's just sort of like, I would say, keep it simple. And people who are reviewing, I'm going to give you a dirty secret, which is that if you have 100 applications in front of you, you're not going to read them all that closely. And you might even just scoop off the top, the ones that, oh, they're not using capitalizations in their grant. They wrote one sentence for everything. So the simpler you can make your mission, the more it will stick in their head and the more they're likely to fund and feel a connection.
Good. That's good.
Um, does your organization have strong leadership? Most organizations will want to see your board list and see that you have an active working board. So a question to ask is, do you have a board that can advocate for your organization? Do your board members fundraise, attend events, and speak about your program? And can they connect you to funders? That is one of the, and we talk more about it in our session about connecting with funders. If you have a board member that has a relationship at that company, at that foundation, that can put your name on the list, it's going to take you that much further, and really give you a benefit. I always say work really hard on your board list. Make sure you're really descriptive. In when you write down what people do and their experience, because at the very least, if you're, for example, an education organization, when I'm a funder looking at your board list, I want to see that you have a former superintendent or principal, a teacher, an education consultant, a parent, a former student, people that really make sense with your mission. And I know that your board can positively contribute. And sometimes it's just a matter of writing down your list, showing it to someone else who's not involved in your organization and saying, hey, if you looked at these people, would you think that they would know what they're doing? This is something that I don't think really is an issue for most village orgs, but you want to see that your board reflects the makeup of your clientele. So if you serve Black youth in Nashville, you don't want a board that's all old white men. I don't see that as a huge problem for the organizations I work with in Nashville, but board makeup is a question that funders ask about a lot, especially over the past few years, where they've been a lot more efforts on the part of funders to increase their DEI practices. They want to make sure that client experience is reflected in your board makeup. Yeah, and I talked about this, just making sure that your board is diverse and expert. Okay. What are your financials like? Does anyone have any questions about board leadership or anything like that? So what are your financials like? Funders want to see, and we talked about this earlier, a diversity of support for your programs. So very rarely does a funder want to be the only person who is funding your work. So you want to show that you are getting funds from individual supporters, from community campaigns and events, and you in kind. That is a great way to show some income for your organization. What are you getting for free? A funder doesn't want to be the only person giving you money, and largely they don't want to fund a gift that's more than 10 or 20% of your organization's budgets. There's always exceptions to this rule. NASA is an exception to that rule. But you could see a grant that is for $150,000, but your organization has a $30,000 budget. I wouldn't apply for more than 10, because even if it would be great to get that money, they're probably not going to give it, and you're going to look more savvy and experienced asking for the appropriate amount of money than you would asking for something that's 5 times what you have already. I'll speed through this, but funders are going to want to make sure that you have an established fiscal year, financial statements or budgets created by your board or an accounting professional. They are going to want to see that you are keeping careful record of the funds that go in and out of your organization. I know a lot of my clients, they are their organization's top donor, and they will just pay for things out of their own account or their Zelle as it comes up, because that's easier and faster. But you really want to put all that money into your organization's account so that you can show the movement in and out. They're going to want to see that you have up-to-date tax records and that you're in good standing with the state. And they want to see that you have the systems in place to manage the money that you have applied for. So less so with smaller grantors. They don't really care if I'm giving you $5,000. I trust that you're going to spend it well. But if I'm the city, or if I am a large funder giving you a huge amount of money, I want accountability about how that money is being managed. So I want to make sure that you have accounting staff or a COO or a consultant you work with or a qualified board member treasurer that's doing all of that for you. Just a quick word on audits. Your organization does not need an audit to apply for grants unless you make $750,000 or more a year. That's just best practice. However, some funders might require it. If that's the case, you can reach out, talk to them about your organization, why you don't have an audit, and see if that will still work. Or you can skip it altogether and just say, this is an opportunity for us right now. That being said, there are very onerous requirements right now by the city on small organizations about audits. I have taken the time to aggregate some stories from people that I am actually going to be able to talk to some city council members about. If this is an issue you've faced in the past, please email me. I would love to hear from you and your experience so that that can inform my conversation. I want to save time for questions, so I'm just kind of speeding through. But how much can you expect to be awarded? Like I said, they don't want to give more than 10 or 20% of your organization's budget. Grant writing is really hard. If you got 10% of the grants that you apply for in your first year, that would be an amazing year. Most organizations get between 15 to 30% of the grants they apply for. And that's after many years of having a successful grant writing program. The best way to get all the grants you apply for is to be very realistic and targeted in your goals, in how much money you apply for, and who you're applying with. So not throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks is going to yield you a better chance of getting grants. And I will also say that funders can take a lot of time to disperse funds. It's not great. It is what it is. They're dealing with their own bureaucracy. So I would say every grant you receive, you should budget up to 3 months before you actually have that money in hand. And some grantors will give 90% upfront or 80%. Some will give the whole amount. Some want you to report at the end, and then they'll release the final check. Some are on blanking reimbursement basis. So you have to pay all the costs up front and then you get reimbursed in the end. That's really challenging for a small organization, but you just want to make sure you're being careful as you vet organizations to make sure that you're in a good position, if that's the case, that you can pay for those funds up front. And then yay, you have the funds. Now what? It doesn't stop there. You need to make sure, and I think this spoke to what Kara talked about earlier. Once you have the money, you want to make sure that you can use the money. You don't want to leave any money on the table. So you need to ask yourself, when I get this money, will I have the staff bandwidth to carry out the programs? So that means both the staff who are going to manage the grant, do the reporting, do the follow-up, communicate with the funder, and the staff who are running your programs. If you say, hey, I got $10,000 for this new program, do they have the benefit? Do they have the bandwidth to do the work? So you don't want to set your staff up for failure. You want to set yourself up for success. And you also want to ask yourself, do I have the systems in place that are going to help me report on these outcomes and follow the financial requirements of the grant. So you want to make sure you're tracking your funds the whole year, that you can say to a funder, this is exactly where your money went versus everyone else's money. And that you're doing really good evaluation of your program so you have those numbers to back yourself up. So that is the end of my slides, and I just want to open things up for questions. We have 5 minutes left, but I am going to stay on till the cows come home and answer every single question everyone might have.
Thank you so much. This was so helpful.
Okay, I'm glad it was helpful. And what we're going to talk about in the next couple of sessions is both figuring out what grant is right for you and communicating with funders so you have the best opportunity to get those grants. Anyone else? I think my email is in the registration. I'm going to drop it into the chat for everyone. And if you think of a question, oh, I see a hand from Dawn. Did I? Okay.
Yes. Hey, Emily, absolutely love you. Everybody who's listening, watching, Emily is the GOAT. She was the only consultant and grant writer that had 100% of her things won. So I appreciate you. I don't even know if you realize that, but every time your hands were involved in something with the village, it was amazing. So my question to you, as you are preparing for these next couple of sessions, are you also going to cover how, once you are issued a grant, to make sure your metrics, your KPIs, or your logic model, and the things that they want in the grant or requiring the grant are things that you are actually tracking and measuring. So that way, if there's a multiple grant year or a way to get multiple grants, you can actually keep it.
So that is not my area of expertise.
Okay.
When you think about it, being a writer, a relationship builder, that's a very different skill set than being the person that does the math. But I think absolutely that's super important. And there are other village consultants who are doing that for people and doing a great job. So if everyone feels like that's a need, then I think we would talk to the village. Maybe that's the next class that we do or series that we do, because I totally agree that that's really, really important. I can help organizations with like the very basics of getting that qualitative data, but there are really smart people in Nashville doing this. I don't think Brittany Tyler from Diamond in the Rough is on this call, but she's absolute superstar at that. So I'm gonna pass on to Shekinah that is a need, because I think that's so important too.
Thank you.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Emily. I was gonna say, Brittany rocks with that, and I do know that there are a lot of orgs that need need that and add it to a workshop.
Yep.
I mean, we have thrived through it and what we've learned through you, but I know that was the key thing that you helped us establish. So definitely add that to a workshop series or something. And Diamond is always here to support, learn, and grow with you.
Yeah, and I want to say, just as an example with Diamond, they get one grant through the state that requires a lot of very intricate reporting. But even though that's a lot of work, Diamond then has the numbers that they use for everything else, every grant opportunity that they apply for, every funder that they work with. And if I can brag on them for a second, they are hitting it out of the park in an amazing way. Like, they can't fail, basically. They're so good. And I think part of it is that they've taken the time to collect this data. And thank you, Nelson, for sharing that. It's all these things are such unique skill sets. And like what I tell my clients is like, You do what you do, I do what I do, and I could never do what you do. So if you feel like, oh, maybe you don't have the knowledge or you find the process intimidating, you're doing another part of the process that is so essential, much more essential. And if everyone puts their heads together, we can really figure it out, and get you guys some money. So if there aren't more questions, my email is in the chat. If you didn't register, please do, because we have sent out some materials for everyone. One thing that should kind of sent out to everyone is something that is called the grant readiness form. And that just is a great place to aggregate a bunch of information about your organization. So if you do have questions or reach out, I can look at that and know your budget, see your paperwork, and give you the best answers that I can. So thank you so much, guys. And I hope everyone has a great week. And yep, let me grab the registration link right now. 1 second. I'm gonna drop it here. And it's also, oh wait, I just sent it to Dr. Catherine, not to everyone. It's also in the Village Weekly email. You can also find the registration link. All right, so everyone have a great week, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you, Ken. Bye, everyone.